Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nexus podcast, where we talk about connected buildings and the playbooks behind them. This episode is for facility managers, data and integration nerds, and OT cybersecurity specialists who are focused on improving operational efficiency, tenant satisfaction, mitigating cybersecurity risks, specifically in multifamily buildings. Today, we are digging into QuadReal's converged network strategy, and we have some specific multifamily apartment challenges that we're going to cover within that. This matters for facility teams because you're likely dealing with maintenance personnel having to manage more square footage per individual than ever before. And there's ways people are fighting this problem with connected building solutions. And it doesn't just stop there. This shows up for construction management and project delivery teams trying to make connected buildings outcomes survive the design and construction phase. One quick note, if you're trying to stay on top of the space without wading through the vendor noise, we write a short newsletter. It comes out every other week. It's called the Connected Buildings Briefing. It's about 5 minutes to read, and it breaks down everything that is worth paying attention to in this space. It's read by over 9,000 people. You can grab a link to that in the show notes if you're not signed up for it. My name is Brad Bonavita. I'm the head of product at Nexus Labs, and I am joined today by Andy Rodriguez, who is the director of building connectivity at QuadReal. Andy, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Brad. How are you?
Doing great. I'm excited that you're here. We're going to get into QuadReal's operational efficiency journey. We're going to talk about some specific examples from the IMMIX, right? You told me before we started. I'm going
IMMIX,
to
yeah,
IMMIX,
it is
IMMIX
IMMIX.
apartment buildings that you guys are owners of, and then we're actually going to get into some OT cybersecurity related stuff towards the end because that sounds like that's your specialty, and I want to dig into that. So
Right on.
we're going to do all that. First, we're going to do a quick at the Nexus, which is just updates from what's going on at Nexus Labs. If you're listening to this and you're a longtime listener, we've been missing for like 3 weeks. So sorry, we've been a little delayed. If you do know us well, you know that we are in the trenches of NexusCon planning right now. Like all the hard stuff, it goes on, the 2 months before. So just a couple of updates to keep the audience in tune with what's, coming out with NexusCon. Um, well, if you're brand new to this, NexusCon is our annual in-person conference, October 5th through 7th at the department in Hudson's in Detroit, Michigan. This is the third year we're putting it on. On our website, the agenda is now live, which is really cool, and it's got probably 80 to 90% of the details in there now. One thing that's really cool that we did this year is that we're really trying to get down to the different roles that people have that come to the conference, and we kind of came up with seven main roles, and we made those roles tags within our agenda. So if you go to our NexusCon website and you click the filter button, you can see tags, and you can see which of those seven roles you identify closest with and filter for that, and it'll show you the exact path you should take at NexusCon that's going to be best for you. So we're really trying to cater to all sorts of different people and see how these different groups can connect with each other. Second thing I'll point out is that we are in the development of some really cool tours with the city of Detroit and Bedrock in general. So guests are going to have an opportunity to RSVP for tours where there's kind of two different styles of tours. There's a technical in the weeds tour where Bedrock is going to be talking about some of they're going to be like showing mechanical systems in their operating center. That one's going to be pretty exclusive and just for a couple people. But we're also going to have a more general tour with rocket tours that's going to walk the city, show people the cool parts of Detroit, the history, talk about some of the buildings and the architecture, and they are going to mix in some, smart building and connected building information too. It's going to be really sweet. So keep an eye out for that. Attendees are going to have an opportunity to join that. And then the last thing I'll say about NexusCon is the demo stage. We released some information about the demo stage and how it's completely elevated this year. It's on the main floor. I won't go through everything we said in the past. It's going to be live streamed, recorded, yada yada. Going to be amazing. Probably the best demo that most people have ever had an opportunity, best stage anybody's ever had an opportunity to present a demo on. Applications to be on the demo stage, if you're a technology vendor who wants to be there, are due August 14th. So you basically have 2 weeks. Actually, after this comes out, you're going to have a little less than 2 weeks. And we will put in the show notes the application that explains the information of exactly how to submit your application. So those are kind of three good updates. Andy is going to be with us at NexusCon. So, Andy, my first question to you is, what are you most looking forward to this year at NexusCon?
Yeah, I mean, the relationships or the new relationships, the new people to meet. I spent a lot of time hanging out kind of in the foyer last year, and just, I was just meeting people, just standing around, hanging around the tables there, getting to know, what they did, what kind of cool things they were up to. It seems like we're all looking to find new ways to be innovative, but also to serve either the clients or the stakeholders that we work with. So it's always cool to get a pulse on what's happening out there outside of your own bubble. And for me as a Canadian, the US firms, there's some pretty large firms that do some very cool things. So I'm always keen to listening in on random conversations, but then obviously the all the good stuff you guys put on as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you nailed it too. I think like we really when we come in and we say educational first and non-salesy, what it does is it makes people come in with this very collaborative, focused mindset. You were talking about just meeting people and exchanging ideas in the foyer. Like I hear that all the time, and I think it's because we set that precedent that like everybody is here to learn, regardless of what stage you're at. You're here to learn first. And so when people bring that mindset in, it's pretty cool the connections people make. So if you haven't signed up, we'll put a link in the show notes to sign up as well, but we would love to see you there. Okay, so let's dig into actually talking about what Andy does, what QuadReal does, all those things. First, let's start with some rapid fire context settings. So you have to be quick with your answers because this is just setting the stage for people. But first, what is QuadReal and what is your role within the company?
Yeah. So QuadReal's been around now officially for 10 years. So we own, operate, and develop real estate on behalf of BCI, who is our managing partner. So we have about 100 million Canadian in assets that we are either invested in or operate. Strong presence in Canada, but we also have a global presence. Facilities in the U.S., in the U.K., in Australia. Kind of all over the place. But yeah, we as a group, are put in place to be fiduciaries for those funds, for that money, for the pensioners, so that they have, a good foundation to live off of when they retire.
Nice. And what type of buildings are we talking about? Because you guys do a couple different style of commercial buildings, right?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that we'll talk about a lot today are commercial and residential, well, specifically multifamily residential, but we have our hands in a lot of different kinds of assets. So industrial, retail assets, storage facilities, student housing. We're involved on the investment side on data centers. We have a debt team on the construction side. So yeah, we're in it in almost every facet on the real estate side.
Cool. And then your title, as I said, is Director of Building Connectivity. Tell us a little bit about like what that means and what your goals are and what your team looks like.
Yeah, so my role specifically is to help that foundational, that network layer, the compute layer that our operational technology runs on. So a lot of that is really an operational group within Canada. But we are again moving more of our operations outside of Canada, but using that same blueprint. But really, my role, we have a couple people on my team that help, on to cover, we'll say, the Canadian landscape. But really, my main clients, or the clients that I'm responsible to, are the operators at the building. But they're
Mm,
also, the teams, like the investment management teams here at QuadReal, right? Like why are we investing, this much in a network? Is it necessary? Why is that necessary? So
right.
so yeah, there's a heavy part of my job that's operations. But then there's also the making sure that we're being responsible with what we're asking for.
Okay. And then my last question, the context setting is you talked about the operators and that side of it. Who are those people? Are those QuadReal employees typically, or yeah,
Yep.
how do you guys do that?
Yeah. So the people that I interact with the most will be your operations managers, supervisors, kind of the boots on the ground. But then to that point as well, like they're also supported by other vendors, like on the build and automation side, or CCTV, or lighting control, right? So there's conversations that we have with those folks as well. That side of the house changes very frequently. So it's a matter of just making sure that everybody's kind of talking the same language and has the same goal and for the buildings that we operate.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think that gives kind of a good grasp of who QuadReal is. In terms of who QuadReal is, like in a relationship to Nexus Labs, James Dyson, Thano Lambrinos have been on the podcast together before, and we've used your guys' portfolio as an example and case studies multiple times, and I think that we just see it to be a very mature portfolio compared to a lot of other owners, which gives people an opportunity to learn how you got there. And a big part of what you guys have done that I think like really defines your maturity is the centralization of data and operations that you've done. You presented at NexusCon in 2025, and I took this quick quote that you said that the centralization that you guys have lets you command or quarterback from anywhere. So for the audience, kind of what do you think of when you think of the centralization of QuadReal's operations, and like what's kind of been the journey? Where did you start, and what have you gotten to?
Yeah, so the journey started, probably about 8 years ago or so, when when we were looking to effectively put in a new technology stack within one of our buildings, and the price tag that we got back was eye watering, or to some of the folks. So they came back to us and were like, hey, like, should we be paying this? And I mean, to be honest, it was quite high, but at the same time, sometimes you get what you pay for, right? So we took that pricing back, and thought to ourselves, how can we go about this in a way that best serves the business for a long term, right? So that's really how the journey started. We made some decisions, based on our conviction, based on our experience. At the time, we were quite young as a group, I'll say, from an operating perspective, but we had the chops from either a construction or IT or mechanical or electrical background, so we kind of knew what we were gonna get ourselves into. So yeah, that really led again to us understanding, what that would look like to even roll this out. And
Mm-hmm.
then from that came a whole ton of other outcomes, like this centralized operation,
Right.
like the centralized network management, that was understood, but at the same time we didn't know which partners we'd even need to be working with, to be
Yeah.
able to leverage that centralization.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, we're using the word centralization kind of in two different ways. I was thinking about this before we started. I want to be clear to the audience of like how, like, so we're not confusing that word. So when you first were talking about centralization, you're talking about the specific centralization of QuadReal's data. So you guys use a converged passive optical network, which I think I can show some links to other pieces of content where we've talked to you guys about that. But that converged network brings data from a bunch of places centralized into one thing. And then we use centralize again. And I think we're going to dive a little bit into this as one of the outcomes that's on top of that network is that you are centralizing your operations team. A common term is an ROC, or remote operations center, where people are physically sitting in one centralized location and can see like everything that's happening across QuadReal buildings, so you can be more efficient to like tackle issues and do things right. Do you agree with the split there of the word centralization? Does that make sense with how you guys are doing it?
For sure, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you nailed it, Brad. Right, there was a piece to centralize everything that happened within a building, right? Um, and that can be, anywhere from like 200,000 square feet to 2 million square feet, right? Central, that there's a lot to centralize, no matter kind of what kind of building size you're talking about. But then thereafter, right, if you have a portfolio of buildings, then there's, understanding, what you can do from that ROC, or we call it BOC,
Okay.
building operations center. But yeah, there's the opportunity to have, your most senior staff, or your most specific staff, look at problems on a grand scale, right, where you're not just looking at, one or two buildings, you're looking at the portfolio, right? So
Yeah.
that's the other centralization piece that you touched on there.
Yeah, yeah, and when they do that, they can make smart, scalable decisions across multiple like bit like there's an issue in building A, and we address that. Let's make sure that that same issue isn't going to be a problem in buildings B through Z because we have the control to just look the other side of the screen here and make the change, right?
For sure, yeah, and we're
Cool.
regionally distributed in Canada, in really kind of three main cities, some auxiliary cities as well, but being able to kind of understand that, like, oh hey, like the temperature in the West Coast is going to be extremely high today, like let's start to cool all those buildings down a little early, right? Like that's, kind of one of those outcomes, right, of having that regional understanding of what's happening in different places.
Yeah, cool. Okay. One, this is kind of a nuanced question, but I think it's important because I'm segueing a bit, but this comes up in our audience a lot. Is that you said one of the issues that you brought up, that, or challenges I should say, that you brought up during your NexusCon presentation, is that you guys own the network, and so it changes your relationship with vendors sometimes. And we talk a lot here about the phrase vendor lock-in, where it's like, well, if your vendors own all of your assets and your network and your systems, then you don't have that much control of it. You guys have gone so far into being autonomous for that, that I see this other challenge that mature building owners face, where your vendors are saying, well, you guys own all this, so you're responsible for like adjustments, changes. Like, can you, is that like, has it gone that far over to the spectrum that now it's like changing your contractual obligations or the contracts that you're writing with your vendors because you're owning more of this than they are?
Yeah, that's a great point. So what we found is, are there challenges? There certainly are, but at the same time, I think, there's vendor partners that we, have good relationships with, and they understand that, we have a pretty big technical bench that, is, isn't just, blowing hot air, right? Like what we're doing is we're using technologies that are, known, very well known in, we'll say the IT industry or the networking industry. And we have experts as well that know how to operate, in the building automation space, and that's their bread and butter. So what I'm trying to, I guess, get to here is that the vendor community, I think, understands that from QuadReal's perspective, there's certain standards that we are now kind of dictating, and when we don't want to deviate from, right? And having a vendor push back is, it happens, and it's fine, right? Like we're not, we try to be, laying a foundation that we know is going to be, something that is going to be in place for the long haul, right? Like we are long-term investors. So what we're doing is we're putting kind of our money where our mouth is, to a certain extent, with putting in this, good technology, and having people, work in that environment. You're going to have to take your lumps every now and then from a vendor being
Yeah,
like, why are you doing it this way? But that's a fight that's worth fighting, because we know that our convictions are strong,
yeah,
in the foundation that we're building. So we're okay there. But yeah, from a contractual standpoint, we haven't really had to, like, let's say, rewrite the book entirely. But from a construction standpoint, we have some really smart people that are now inserting very specific language in divisional specifications that are, that the vendor community needs to adhere to. Otherwise, you can't be part of the bid, right?
nice.
So I mean, I think that's where we're, perhaps starting to carve out something a little bit different here, right? Where we're dictating the terms of how people kind of operate within our buildings, or how they construct things in our building. So that is really kind of it's almost, whittling out the people that don't want to, work by those confines, or work in that construct. But it really helps us deliver the way we want to deliver.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. It's such an evolution from like the vendor owns control to you own control to like really taking that. And we'll be talking in the construction track at NexusCon a lot about the idea that you just said of like how to put into specifications and contracts early on what you're expecting from these vendors, so that these connected building outcomes actually survive through the design and construction and into what the occupants are actually going to see.
For sure.
Okay, so I think it's always better to, or it's easier for the audience to understand a lot of the things we're talking about if we ground it in a real story, which is why we're going to go back to a little bit of, well, specifically to the building that you were talking about at NexusCon. So tell us about, it's a multifamily apartment. Kind of tell us the story of, I guess starting kind of at how you acquired this quickly. Like what did this look like for you guys to get this apartment?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was in some of those rooms when they were, making the deal, right? But as far as I know, there was a development, a condo development, in Toronto, that unfortunately, wasn't going to be, wasn't going to pan out, from the from the financial sense, somebody decided, hey, it's time to cut our losses here, and move on from this project. So there was a distressed sale of sorts. QuadReal was able to then acquire the property. Um, and it was early enough in the stage where it was likely, probably the pouring of concrete, so nothing was fully baked in terms of what type of access control system was going to be in there, what kind of building automation system. So it was early enough that we could pivot to the strategy that we had already adopted at that point,
Hmm.
right? I believe this was 2019 that we acquired this property, and at that point we had already started down this road of the converged building network at most of our commercial assets. So it was one of the earlier, we'll say, residential properties, but now all of our residential properties fall under this same kind of standard practice. So we
Okay.
were able to get in there early enough.
So you kind of already had the playbook for how you wanted to write the specifications to get it built the way that it was because you've done this at least once before.
Yeah, we had the commercial side, I would say, fairly well understood, right? But we were pretty early in the residential. On the residential side, we had only really done one other building at that point with that same kind of strategy.
Okay. And so you presented about this with Saruf from Code Labs, who's one of your, technology vendor partners through this all. He
Yep.
he mentioned the integrations that you guys have going in this building. He said link sensors or leak sensors, building automation system, metering, occupancy sensors, smart door locks, smart lockers, CCTV, access control, all in one platform. Is that in the specification right at the beginning that all of those different systems are going to be integrated together from the get-go?
Not in the specification. So when we go to tender to specify a specific component or operational technology within the building, it needs to be open, right? So it needs to be able to have some kind of open API, or be able to for us to be able to actually interface with that controller or with that front end to then be able to pull that data from it. And that's where we use integrators like Code, right? Who understand very well which are the types of building systems that are actually allowing for that. So at that point, we're adding into the specifications the systems, again, per operational technology set, like all the ones that you mentioned before,
Hmm.
that are open. So from a very baseline standpoint, they can't just be kind of, we like to call it like the vendor lock-in, right? We can't
Yeah,
have just like company A say, hey, you need to use our front end. Well, you typically use the front end anyways, but like it will only work with this license and nothing else kind of thing. Like that's what we try to avoid, right? We try to
yeah,
avoid that vendor lock-in. But during the
gotcha.
specification phase, it just needs to be open, and then we should be able to integrate with it. So
I
then you
see.
can get everything can then just tie in afterwards.
So you got all these open systems that you procure through, the contractors and all that stuff. Do you have an MSI who's overseeing that immigration, or is Code basically acting as that MSI who is going to actually make sure that the AS and metering know how to communicate with one another, for example?
Yeah, that one is we'd probably have to bring in somebody very specific from our team to answer that better than I can. But from a high level, it's really dependent on the building size and kind of the
Hmm.
budget that is allocated to the types of systems that need to integrate, right? So from this perspective, or as far as I know, at IMMIX, we just used Code as the MSI.
Okay, cool. And then going like picturing that your outcome is all these systems communicating effectively together, which gets all the way up to your BOC where people can see all this data in one place. Can you speak at all for the commissioning process of that in terms of like people are saying they're done? Is there specific checks you're doing to make sure that these integrations happened effectively with a commissioning agent or with code or something like that?
Yeah. What I can mention is that with having a integrated building management platform like Code, we are then able to see all devices, and we can see those data points or set points that are associated to those devices. So when you're going through a building floor by floor, although the commissioning agent may, let's just say, to throw a number out there, when they're going into the field and conducting their business, they're completing maybe, let's say, 70 or 80% of their commissioning, and then just assuming, hey, everything else is going fine, we should be good. leveraging the use of code, being able to go through floor by floor, have somebody
Yeah,
very smart on the other end understand everything that needs to show up from a visual perspective, and can actually see data coming into that controller or that device, and being able to administer or change a set point. Therein is the 100% commissioning, right? Or
gotcha.
being able to then understand, hey, this building is fully functional, the way it should be. So although, again, a commissioning agent or a specific vendor may not be going through that, end to end, we then leverage our tools to be able to validate that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And let's kind of talk about some of the like specifics of the multifamily, which I think is sometimes unique to other building types. You mentioned that you have suite level metering so every single unit, as I understand it, has its own electrical and water metering.
Yep.
How did you justify doing that? Like what, that's an expensive cost. Is that typical or is that pretty unique to be able to offer that?
Now it's a standard, right? Like it's something that we're doing now at all of our suites. Now that's probably one of those things that's kind of more common sense than anything else, right? And what I mean by that is, if you have a building, and for whatever reason, I like to, let's say I like to take really long showers, and the person next to me doesn't, right? If there's no metering strategy
Yeah,
in place, we're both paying, $50 a month for water, even though I'm the water
yeah,
hog, right?
yeah,
So having that suite by suite, measure is now fair, right? So
yeah,
now we can't have those complaints that come back to us about the cost of their water, because hey, every drop is being measured. Um,
yeah,
and that also is something that, I think a lot of people these days, we live in an economy that is, things are getting a little bit more expensive. When you see a bill tied to like how much water you're consuming yourself, sometimes that makes you think, hey, like, maybe I should, tone it down a bit, so because I'm spending way too much on water, based on my budget, right? As another example, right? So, and then lastly, one of those things that where it helps, and we talked about leak detection, which, knock on wood, we haven't had any triggers lately, but
hmm,
on the metering side of the house, we've already discovered that there's been, let's say, toilet valves that are leaking water, or faucets that are leaky. So when somebody's consuming much more water, this month than they did the previous 3 months, they come back to us. They're like, hey, like, I think something is wrong with this meter. The meter's working perfectly fine. They're just consuming more water because of a leak that's, actually getting funneled into the proper plumbing system, right? But now we can fix things, like a leaky faucet, before it becomes a larger problem, right? Based on
yeah.
those meters. So yeah,
I'm
it is expensive for sure, but from a long term perspective, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're effectively saying that you're using those meters as condition-based maintenance tools because they're giving you enough data to do that. And yeah, I guess it's a good point that like, of course it's standard so that you're not paying more. Like you brought up the shower example. I was thinking like if your next door neighbor's mining, crypto on the side and you're not, you don't want to pay that electrical. But
For
what I
sure.
what you said in the presentation, or it might have been Saruf who said that I thought was interesting is obviously you've got that metering, but it's so the data is so accessible and exposed that sometimes you're even alerting tenants beforehand, like, hey, you're using way more than you used last month. Is something going on? Do you need to check that you didn't like leave something on or something like that, right? And that's
Right.
a pretty good like tenant experience thing for those people to have within the apartment.
For sure. Yeah, it can be, for some, it can be a peace of mind thing, right? And knowing that, they feel valued, right? Because someone's letting them know before they get a, painful bill.
Yeah. The other last piece of tech that's kind of tenant or multifamily related that I wanted to talk about is access control just for a second, because I think that we talk to a lot of office commercial building owners, and they're actually definitely a step behind multifamily residential when it comes to the access control systems that they have because it's so important to this work. So I'm not familiar with Butterfly MX, but that's who it sounds like you guys used, and it's a little bit advanced. It's not just fob based, but it's mobile based or something, right?
Yeah, no, it's so we have a team or there's a group within our group that deals specifically with the mobile applications, and we've had very good success at that team developing, something that's quite useful to the tenants, and now can integrate with a tool set like Butterfly MX, right? So now you have the ability to basically do everything that you would normally do, let's say as a user of a building, like being able to access the building, with your phone, being able to get into certain areas, like let's say the bike facility, or being able to open, your garage door, normal things. But now you can do things kind of over and above what you might normally think you can do at a residential building, right? You have a guest that's coming in that day, right? Or you have, your friends coming in that day. Now you can give them a pass ahead of time. Or if the Amazon guy is coming to deliver your package, when he presses the button for you to actually get into the building, you can tell him, exactly where to leave it, or be like, hey, can you wait, a minute? I'll be down there. Although I don't know how likely it is to wait. But anyways, it's one of those things where now yourself as a tenant, don't have to be asking the concierge or the maintenance person to do something. You can do that all from, the power of your own phone.
Yeah, cool. Okay, that's I think that's a pretty good setting the stage for what's unique about this building, and what we've talked about so far has been that second definition of centralized we gave, where it's kind of like you centralized operations in a way that makes this building run efficient. So going back to your converged network, your centralization as a place to group in data, we were talking before we started here that your job is actually a lot more specific on the operational technology, privacy, security, cyber side. So maybe just start with like bringing that now in as another piece of decentralization. Was it more that once you were centralized with your data, you were able to be more cybersecurity effective, or once you wanted to be more cybersecurity effective, so you did centralize your data as one of those ways to do that?
Yeah, we, again, for the benefits of converging, our buildings, we were obviously able to now be able to see, at the very least, everything that passes through, the network appliances, the network devices that are at those buildings, right? So now you have all this information, but how do you even unearth all of that, right? It's one thing to have traffic passing through your network, but how do you inspect, um, you know, use that inspection to then catalog, and then after you catalog, like what are you doing with that data, right? So from that converged building network platform, we had a means to have, access to all the data. We tried, a few different things where it came to, um, doing really in-depth device discovery, but we found it pretty tricky on, especially on the operations technology side, to leverage, let's say, IT types of tool sets to be able to
Mm,
understand what was there, because
yeah,
they didn't really speak the BACnet language, or Modbus, or all of those, protocols that are very unique to a building stack. So we finally, after a lot of tried and tested, POCs, landed on Armis. So we then deployed at a large subset, more than half of the sites, of the 60 that we have converged, um, and brought that appliance in to now really kind of unearth, you know, the devices that are in our operational stack, but then also categorize,
yeah,
out of the box, those vulnerability scores, um, and really start to help us now not differentiate, but now how to prioritize, what should we be doing, what is like the red flag or the red flags, and how do we even do something about that, right? Not to say that you don't do anything with the yellow flags, but
yeah.
what we're trying to do here is obviously centralize, a means to all that information from a cyber perspective, from a posture perspective, and then start to attack that, bit by bit. And like probably some other institutional investors, we have, buildings that operate on specific, um, operational stacks, right? Like a Johnson controller, like a Distech, right? So if there's a problem that's arising, in a building, there's probably a subset of buildings that are probably under that same kind of umbrella, right? So now
Hmm.
being able to leverage, a contractor or a vendor to do that same thing at five buildings, right? So we're not
Yeah.
just kind of piecemealing this all over the place, right? We're having a better strategy of, let's hit these targets, but like let's hit the ones that are the biggest, right?
Yeah, let's break down that part just a little bit. And I'm sure there's a lot of different. I'm sure it goes a lot of different ways, but help me with an example of like, so Armis is scanning for you guys, and you're getting these green, yellow, reds, and you see all these reds, and it's like a controller or a sensor or something, and you're like going to the contractor and showing them that installed that, and like, hey, fix this or patch this, or like, how does that communication chain usually go to get it fixed?
Yeah, it can be tricky. It's a lot more difficult in a lot of cases to hit individual controllers. It's tough to just, like, let's say, push once and boom, like everything's upgraded,
Yeah.
right? That's not typically how it works. So what we try to do, right, is understand the problem as best we can, and protect and make some kind of compensating control in the interim, right? To continue, because we have to keep the lights on, right? Like, no matter what, it's all about availability. It's
Yep.
all about being able to make sure that, the people that are using the building can still use the building, right? But how do we mitigate, what can be a pretty big red flag, continue to operate until that vendor can come in and fix this problem on a big scale? So
Hmm.
what you'll typically find is, we'll find a pretty big problem. We'll figure out a way to, let's say, isolate or quarantine that while still maintaining operation, until we can bring somebody in to then do the work required to get us back on our feet into a better operational state.
Nice. That's great. We've made it this far into a conversation about OT cybersecurity without saying AI, which is crazy. And I don't know if we even have time to open up that can of worms, but we will. We have a cybersecurity related session at NexusCon, which I need to talk to you about maybe after the podcast or something, because I think maybe you should be involved in that. But we definitely want to bring that question into this as well at NexusCon of like, okay, you have this ability to scan if you actually have an OT networking, a network monitoring solution like Armis or someone else, and you have these green, yellow, red. But now you've got this orthogonal AI of like either to help you or to hurt you, and how people are thinking about that. We're going to be talking about that with a lot of building owners. So let's save that piece. And if you want to hear what Andy has to say about it, you got to hear what he has to say about it at NexusCon. So uh, let's just close. We'll go do carve outs, but before we do carve outs, just kind of like, you guys are a very mature building owner organization, so I'd love for you to try to summarize just a little bit of actionable advice for somebody who might not be as far as QuadReal. If you were talking to somebody who had more than 20 buildings and no converged network at all, and was just like starting to toy with this idea of like, yeah, we want a central operations team, we want the ability to protect our devices from cybersecurity threats, what's kind of like the first place that they should start to go?
Um, yeah, I would say, you really need to understand, from, let's say, almost at the highest level possible, like from, like, let's say, the board level, um, things that they're concerned about, right? Like, maybe because of just the way QuadReal is, we have a very interested board in making sure that we're, doing the right things, even from a cyber perspective to the building level. So, you know, I think that conversation needs to happen, you know, at the C level or higher, right?
Business case.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you need to make sure that, like, it is understood the kind of impacts that can happen, um, when you don't have the resiliency to withstand not even a cyber attack. Let's say you have a controller that goes offline. Like, what is your building continuity plan? Like, how are you
Hmm.
making sure that people can still use the facility, right? So I think you need to make sure that you're painting this picture that, like, um, if something breaks, like, how are we recovering, right? I think that will help you, um, you know navigate the capital that's then required, because as everyone's aware, right, doing anything at one building can be expensive. Doing it at 20, that's a big ask, right?
Yep.
That's always going to be a big ask. So understanding what perhaps is the long-term strategy for those groups of assets, right? Maybe of those 20, you're only really going to want to hold on to 10 of them really long term, right? So you're going to want to really understand where you're investing, where you're putting, and not only capital but that time as well,
Yep.
right? um, and it's also really important, I think, fundamentally, to make sure that the users are understanding, the do's and don'ts. We have a very good cyber team here as well that does very regular campaigns, to educate our teams, right? To make sure they know, what is the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. So that's super helpful as well where it comes to cyber. But yeah, it's one of the it's a tough one to answer, but I would say that we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today without that buy-in from the top, right?
Yep.
That governance layer helping us understand what the business really wants, because then we could start shooting from the hip and being like, okay, well, you want A through E outcomes. We need to do all of these things to be able to satisfy that.
Yep, yep. That's a fantastic answer. It really reminds me of the keynote from NexusCon last year when we had the Dune kind of table that showed at the bottom. It's like technologies that you can use, and it's like the people who are using those to get jobs done. But at the very top, it's what are the business level outcomes that are achieved through this through path of doing these things.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
a good answer that we hear all the time. So yeah, I think it's definitely the right answer. Okay, let's end quickly with carve outs of some more interesting personal stuff about ourselves. I'll go first with mine. I am a ex baseball player, but now I'm old, so I play men's softball. And uh, so I've been playing in this men's softball league in the town I live in now for 3 years, and I have never won a softball game before for 3 years. And I credit that to two things. I'm a pretty good softball player. Number one, this league has some outstanding teams. And number two, I have a bunch of friends on the team who've never even put a glove on before, but we still have fun with it. So it's a long time to go without winning a single softball game. We won last night, 20-19 in the last game of the season, and it's the first softball game I've won in 3 years. I was so happy. It was the best night of my life to win. I think it was like I counted. It was 700 days I went without winning a softball game. So big night for me in my very amateur softball career. What about you, Andy? What do you got for us?
Those poor pitchers, those ERAs are just.
Yeah, that's been softball for you. Lots of double-digit scores.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I was thinking about what I could bring up on the carve outs, and honestly, I just want to, I guess close it off with being grateful. And this has been, for me, it's been a pretty tough year. Personally, a lot of kind of things have been a bit rough this year, but I'm very grateful for the support that I have from my family, from my wife. Even though my kids probably aren't really supporting me, they do kind of make me feel, grateful that I am a dad and I'm able to spend time with them. um, and yeah, I mean, I'm very grateful that I'm able to work at QuadReal, have an awesome team that I work with. My boss is great. The company treats you very well. And I'm grateful to be able to participate in things like this, right? To be able to be a part of a real estate community that I think is really one that's open, and willing to share. And being able to go to NexusCon and keep that grateful spirit up is something that I'm looking forward to. Just being grateful for the life I have, and being able to share it with others.
That might be one of my favorite carve outs I've ever heard. That's fantastic, and I think a message that not said enough. So thank you. That was really awesome. All right, well, great talking to you, Andy. Looking forward to seeing you in October. Appreciate it.
Okay, friends, thank you for listening to this episode. As we continue to grow our global community of changemakers, we need your help. For the next couple of months, we're challenging our listeners to share a link to their favorite Nexus episode on LinkedIn with a short post about why you listen. It would really help us out. Make sure to tag us in the post so we can see it. Have a good one.